Morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, or hello if you're dialing in and watching this on YouTube later. I'm Andrew Fawkes. I'm the Communications and more recently the Publications Director for the Aston Martin Owners Club. I'm delighted to welcome David Lillywhite, who's found time to join us this morning. Welcome, David. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We'll about that in just a second. Before we get past some housekeeping things, first thing is everybody's on mute to start with. Apart from myself and David. The session is being recorded, so as I mentioned, it will be on the club's YouTube channel soon. There will be time for questions at the end, and you can ask questions in two ways. There's a chat function that you'll find somewhere on your screen, so you can raise questions as we go along, or when we actually open the floor for questions, you can raise your hand by clicking the icon at the bottom of your screen, which is just a hand icon, and then we'll try and cue the questions in. Having said that, we will try to finish on promptly at noon UK time, because I know David's busy for one, and I'm sure everybody else is as well on a Sunday lunchtime or whatever time it is where you are. Kristen House in the background from HQ is pulling the levers and pressing the switches and buttons, so we're hoping that'll work, but you never know with technology, do you? And then over to the business of the day. Many of you will know David, perhaps because he's the editorial director of Hot House Publishing and one of the founders of Magneto Magazine. And he's also edited Octane, Vantage, Enzo, Classic Cars, Bike Magazine, you name it, websites, newsletters. He uses his classic cars on a regular basis, whoopee, and enjoys watches. So, David, where should we start? How about maybe a brief overview of Magneto, and then we can talk about your car history.
Okay, let's do it. And hello, everyone. I'm very much hoping not to bore you senseless, but do ask me questions and things like that at the end, and hopefully we'll be able to cover everything we can. And I'm sure Andrew and Steve and Christine will be able to interject if they've had enough of me too. Now, Magneto, as you may well know, is a quarterly magazine. So we started talking about it in late December 2018, and I think it was a little bit of madness from myself and Jeff Love, who's the publishing director. We worked together before. We launched Octane in 2003, and we somehow decided that we ought to do it all again. But what we felt this time was that quarterly, with a very high production print value, decent paper, while all the monthlies and weeklies are sort of having to downgrade their paper, we thought that was the way to go. And kind of so it's proved. It's doing well, thankfully, and we're just trying to push it along each time and improve it each issue, really. So we're working on issue 13, which comes out in about 3 weeks' time, and we're really happy with it. The last issue was Aston Martin Bulldog on the cover, as you might have seen. We'll talk about offers to AMOC members at the end. So yeah, that's where I am as a starter. And I think then the guys have a few questions. Andrew.
I was picking up straight away on your comment about Bulldog on the last issue. I mean, it has a lovely artwork on the front. If you look at it properly, as I'm sure we all do, you'll see that it's set on a speedo. It's pointing at 200 miles an hour, and there are various other references around it. It's a lovely piece of work. And then, of course, as you get inside, the point you're making about it being differential. I mean, one thing is the weight of the paper, that it's perfect bound, and all the rest of it. But I was struck by the Morgan tools that were in there, just beautiful pictures of all woodworking tools, and just happened to land at the same time as my first trip to the Morgan factory. So it resonated with me, and it is such a different thing to see in magazines. How do you come to that kind of ideas as developing Magneto?
We have a really good art director, for starters, but I think the crucial thing about print at the moment is it's got to do something different from online, from digital. You can type anything in and you'll find the answer. It might not always be right, but generally it will be. There's so much information out there. So it feels like it's the right time to have a magazine that you can luxuriate in. And if you've got 7 pages of Morgan tools, if people enjoy that, you obviously did, Andrew, then I think that kind of differentiates us a bit, and it gives us a chance to luxuriate in things and just sit back and think about things a bit more slowly rather than rushing through via Google and never quite taking everything in. I think you can sit back with a decent print magazine. So that's the theory, and I hope people agree.
And you can't knock your cup of coffee over your keyboard while you're reading a magazine.
There is that. You can
ruin the magazine, of course, but I hope not.
Yeah.
But actually, in the audience, we have with us Steve Goodman. Steve is also has a background in publishing, and I know you know very well, because Steve is not only sits on the publications committee of the Aston Martin Owners Club, but also he's the guy who brought us together with you to create the offer that you kindly provided for our members. Steve, shall I cue you in at this point? Would you like to join in?
Yeah, happy to join in and fire a few questions, if I may. One thing I'm interested in is, what feedback have you had from your readers, and where do you see your magazine going? And maybe some of your weirdest letters that you get in. I can't remember if you have a readers' letters page as such, but what kind of things do you get asked to cover?
We don't have a letters page, simply because being a quarterly, it can just seem a little bit out of date. But we do have a lot of feedback via our email newsletter, so we'll publish things digitally as well. We're not complete Luddites. We have a website. So yeah, to go back to that, really the feedback mostly. Well, I'll rewind another step, in that part of the model of Magneto is that we make sure it goes to some very high level collectors. So it will go to all the entrants of Pebble Beach, Amelia Island, the Hampton Court Concours of Elegance, some of the top end racing series. And we make sure that we have all those big collectors reading Magneto, which works very well for advertising, but it also means we have this great sort of feedback loop where these guys will contact us and say, well, I do have this car, I've not featured it before, which is how Bulldog came along. In fact, we've had a question while we've been talking about how many readers we have. So we send out about 10,000 copies to these sort of big collectors and racers, and then sell about another 10,000 via online and newsstands. I think I've answered some of your questions, Steve.
Yeah. I mean, moving on to cars specifically, I mean, your background goes quite a way back, and editing Octane and what have you. So I'm sure over the years you've got some favorite cars, and obviously us all being Aston enthusiasts, a question would be, what would be what you consider the most beautiful your Aston Martin that you would love to own? And besides Astons, if you had to put them to one side, or that may be the same car, what car, if you could have one car in your garage, what would it be, and why?
The bit that gets me there is one car in garage. Is that actually possible?
Maybe not. Two.
I've always struggled with that, and my favorite car changes from day to day. But as far as Aston Martins go, I've got a real thing for just the early DB4s. Just the purity of them. I think I prefer the way they drive than the 2.4 cars like that. And although they improved in drivability over the years, I just love the purity of the DB4, especially the very early series. But alongside that, this is the whole thing about not being able to have one car. I'd have a V12 Vantage, I think. I absolutely love that car. I love the fact that really it doesn't feel like it should have a V12 in, and it gets a bit squiggly, and it just feels such good fun. So I think my best experiences have been probably V12 Vantage. We took a Vanquish out into the desert in California to El Mirage years ago. In fact, Christine, there's a picture of that. I don't know if you'll be able to get that up, and the El Mirage Vanquish.
Sure.
Fantastic, thank you.
Sorry, bear with me.
And that's all right. That's the one. So we took this, this was a fantastic car that we took out into the Mojave Desert. and over to El Mirage, which is where they do all the speed testing. Incredible heat. And in fact, we were allowed to run the Vanquish up the strip at El Mirage, which was very generous of the timekeepers there. I didn't time it because I wasn't allowed to, because I didn't have the license to do so, but it felt astonishing. So I think it's, again, I'm straying off the question a little, Steve, but really it's about experiences for me. Christina, there was the Don Rose DB5, the rat rod, which had the most amazing time driving this. I don't know if you all remember this. This was Don Rose. At the time he was working with RM Sotheby's, big Aston collector, and he bought a very rough old DB5 from the desert, funnily enough, and it was solid, but it was really rough. So he just turned it into a kind of what he referred to as a rat rod, which is, it felt slightly wrong, but it was just a really good fun car to drive. You've been able to find it, Christina?
Sorry, yes, I thought you could see it. I beg your pardon.
That's all right. Sorry to bombard you.
That's okay.
Let's see this. So it was actually, although it is ratty, it was the sort of car that you can just drive and drive. We drove that along, again in the States, along the Highway 1 around Monterey, and it just drove incredibly well. Everything was set up perfectly. And I think that's the kind of car where you're not too worried about what you do with it. You can just have great fun. And I think you'll see along the roof, press on regardless, which is Don's little motto. And there are a few more experiences like that. We've had DBs. I think we had all the DBs at Millbrook Testing Ground a few years ago for Octane. And just jumping out of one into another was absolutely astonishing. And that's where I really concluded that DB4 was my favorite. So I've gone a long way around it, but yeah. I'm back to you, Steve.
And outside of Aston's, is there a car that you would lust after?
Again, so many. I think looks-wise, probably talking Lamborghini Miura.
Can we just stop the screen share, Christine? Thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that one, David. My favourite car of all time. Even my DB6 in the garage knows I love a Miura, but it also knows it'll never win on practicality, so it'll never get swapped, never mind the price.
This is it, because yeah, if I owned one, I don't know how well, I'm sure I would drive it, but they're not quite as good to drive as they are to look at, but they're better than most people tend to give them credit for. And it's often the way with any classic cars. I'm sure all of you know that you could go from one DB4 to another the same year, same series. One drives brilliantly, one is just quite unpleasant. So you have to be really careful.
That's a good point. And that's a question there, because you know when you do these multi-car tests, like you said at Millbrook with a series of DBs, you know, and you've obviously like the 4 for purity as well. But when it comes to driving them, can you tell instantly you've got a ratty one versus a good one, or if you haven't driven them before? I mean, it must be unusual or a skill that I certainly wouldn't have anything like.
It is difficult, and I think the only way to do it really, I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of people who claim they know everything about cars, aren't there? Nobody does. I certainly don't. And the best way really is to bring a specialist along as well, and just and say, look, this steering doesn't feel quite right. And you know what it's like with a steering box or something like that. You've got a weird amount of play in it sometimes on the steering wheel, or it'll go tight on lock because it's been adjusted badly. So it's just a case of asking the specialist to have a quick drive as well and say, you know, how does this work compared to a really decent one? And sometimes they'll say, that is just what you do and you drive around it. As is often the case with steering in particular. Sometimes they'll be able to talk the owner through, which is quite a nice thing if an owner's brought a car along and say, look, this isn't feeling quite right. It's probably the tires. It's probably just this setup. Leaf springs are often a problem. that they've been just replaced with slightly incorrect rates. So we do find a lot of that cars aren't quite right. We have to work around that.
Well, speaking of leaf springs, someone's asked a question, what do you think about new cars like the Valkyrie, Valhalla and Vulcan?
Yeah, they're definitely lacking leaf springs. I think that's where they've gone wrong. They're looking really good, to be honest. I had a great experience at Paul Ricard, where Aston Martin took out the Vulcan for the first time for customers, and I managed to hook on the back of that. So slightly charmed life. And I'd just like to say that along with things like this, I also sit at this very desk for hours on end as well, usually into the night while people haven't sent in the copy or pictures. But on the good days, I sat with Darren Turner in the Vulcan. I've not driven it, but he drove me around Paul Ricard at ridiculous speeds, absolutely loving the fact that I was trying to brake for him with my feet. And it was absolutely astonishing experience. And I also got to drive the, we started V8 Vantage going around the track, then we went into the Vantage GT3, and then into the 177, which was really interesting. And then we got the passenger ride in the Vulcan. I think it's a great thing that Aston Martin have continued to push this and had halo cars, really. Valkyrie and Valhalla, I think, they're looking promising. They've obviously struggled to get them out on time. But I think it's what they have to do to attract attention and to move technology on. That's a good thing.
Mm.
What going back to the magazine and your general history magazine, what do you think is your best story, or perhaps the one you've enjoyed the most, whether or not they're the same thing?
Funny one, isn't it? I really enjoyed, while we were on Aston's, I really enjoyed following Bulldog. I've been up and down to Bridge North to see it being restored at CMC. And that's been fascinating, and talking with the widow of William Towns, because I don't know if you're aware, she's got all his drawings still. She's very, very passionate about what he did and about keeping that legacy. And until very recently, she had some of his other cars as well, the funny little sort of kit car type things. And she's just sold those to the owner of the Bulldog. That was a great experience. And what I really love is being able to see cars in workshops and put together and really understand what's gone on with them. That's just as important to me as driving them. But as far as great experiences goes, I have been very lucky. I'm just trying to think of a few. There's I went on a Lamborghini trip about just before lockdown, actually, and I got to drive Miura, Countach, Espada, cars like that. That was pretty special. But most of all, I think it's the people. And the one that I always say is Norman Jewis, who's the old Jaguar test driver. In, I think it's 2015 or 2016, just I've not got that in my notes actually. He was awarded an OBE, and bizarrely he asked me to come along with him, which I was really touched by. So it was myself, Tony Keefe from Jaguar Heritage, and Norman's son. And we went to the palace, and he was awarded the OBE by Prince Charles. And he wanted me to take lots of pictures of him, which I did. And then we had a little surprise lined up for them. And we took them to Sterling Moss's house. And incredibly, and I was sat there thinking, I'm just an idiot from Watford. I don't really know what I'm doing here. But here I was, sat with Norman and Sterling, and they were just chatting away. Susie was coming in and out, and that's the picture. There we go. They were sat together like two little naughty schoolboys, and they kept talking about ladies they remembered, and except obviously they called them Crumpet. So apologies to all, but that's Sterling's way, or that was Sterling's way.
Yeah.
And they were just giggling and couldn't stop laughing about all the funny experiences. And Norman was so proud and so happy. Susie kept coming in and telling them off, bringing cups of tea in. And then they got onto, as you'll see, they got onto the wine and the, I'm not sure what Norman was on now. I think it might have been gin. And we had about 2 hours there of them just reminiscing. It was absolutely priceless.
It's a great photograph.
Yeah.
And it looks like they're both holding glasses that have got some kind of engraving on. So those probably glasses alone are probably, unique memorabilia or something that just come out of the cupboard.
Exactly that, yes. And you know, with Sterling, because of his accident at Goodwood in, off the top of my head, 62, his memory has never been great. So he's got all these amazing scrapbooks. So if somebody asks him something, I'll say, oh, you know, when did you last race with Norman? And he says, oh, well, I think it was this. Susie will go off and get a scrapbook and she'll open it up and it's beautifully written. Everything very carefully noted about where they were. And it'll say, for instance, if it was on the Targa Florio, he'll say, he had a Fiat hire car and they did this number of miles in it and they went around the circuit this amount of times and they went to bed at 3 in the morning, they got up at 5 and they went out in the Fiat again and then they did this. And every little detail is in those amazing diaries and scrapbooks. They're really quite special. So they're the experiences I remember as much as anything. And then there are really silly experiences. Christine, there's a picture of the awful Carmen Ghia with Wayne Carini. If you don't mind sharing that again, please. That's the one. So during Monterey week, there's the Concorde de Lemon, which is basically take along the worst car you can think of. And I got a phone call the day before Concorde de Lemon saying, meet me at Dodie's, which is a sort of quite a well-known dealership in Monterey. And he has some really terrible cars. And Wayne Carini, who does Chasing Classic Cars on TV, he arranged to meet me there. He'd bought this awful Carmen Ghia to take to Concorde de Lemon. And basically in this, although I'm grinning, I was actually acting as brakeman. I was pulling up the handbrake to try and slow down because it had no brakes. I had no floor. We really shouldn't have been on the road, obviously. But it's probably about a mile. And the road was pretty deserted. And those bits of tape really were doing some good. They were holding in the bits that would have come off otherwise. And I've never laughed so much in my life. We just couldn't stop giggling. And when we turned up at Concorde de Lemon, people just cleared out of our way and everyone was laughing with us. And then we went off and judged the other cars. And it's that kind of experience right in the midst of Monterey Week and Pebble Beach that's, you know, quite serious, that you still have this amazing time with people who love cars and appreciate cars, but want to talk with kind of fellow enthusiasts, not just pick away at Concorde details. I think that's really crucial.
Yeah.
What you call patina in that photo, isn't it?
I think that's a touch beyond it.
I was thinking when you said that you like cars in workshops, I was thinking, well, anybody's got a classic car, you know, has a mixed feelings about workshops because we like being in there, but not necessarily being in there as often as we might otherwise be.
That's very true. I have a habit of taking things apart, and then they tend to sit for slightly too long. I've got that optimism problem. I imagine that there'll be a few of you. Thumbs up who's got the optimism problem where they take things apart, and thank you very much. Yeah, it's never quite the same trying to get them back together. And I've done that far too many times.
Have you got anything that's in pieces at the moment?
Incredibly, I've cut right back. When we launched Magneto, I sold, what did I have? I had the Citroen SM, which I bought in the States unseen for $1,500, and I restored it and I got it really good, but I did feel I was sitting on a sort of automotive grenade slightly. So I sold that just ahead of starting Magneto. Did the same with the Porsche 996, which I didn't drive very much because it was kind of too immaculate and wasn't quite doing it for me. It felt slightly characterless compared to some of the cars I've got. Had an MGB GT track day car, which was brilliant, but I felt I'd done everything I could with that. So I'm left with my ratty old Subaru Impreza 1996 turbo estate, which I've done, I think I've done 80,000 miles in it. It's about 170,000 miles now. And my grandfather's Saab 96 V4, which I was given probably 15 years ago by my uncle. That was one of those cars that did get put to one side. I found that it had a couple of engine problems. I had one of those dangerous weekends where I had a little bit too much free time, and I took the engine out, and this was probably at least a decade ago. Took the engine out, took it apart, had another session where I felt all excited over the car, and took the engine to an engine builder. The engine builder then went bust, and so I'd lost the engine that was kind of original to my grandfather's car. And then probably 3 or 4 years later, a friend turned up at the Octane office and said, "Oh, David, come and see this," and opened up the boot of his Audi, and there's my engine. And he'd been to the engine builders and found that they got going again out of bankruptcy, and my engine was still sat there I hadn't even realized they were back up and running. So I finally had that rebuilt. That was a very long-winded story, and I apologize. But I've just had that rebuilt, and it's back in the car. So the Saab should be finished, ready for springtime. And I'm kind of implying spring 2021, but I'm not going to be pinned to that.
Actually, I no need to apologise for that story at all, because what I think you did there was some of the thing that we love about cars. It's the emotion that's piled into them. So if you've had the car a long time and it's taken you loads of places and you met lots of people, then actually the value is irrelevant. It's all in the emotion. And what you've just picked up there is a family car. Was it a new to your grandfather? Is it a one family car?
Well, I know it's a 72 car. He bought it in 75. And that's kind of all I knew about it. And then I was chatting to my aunt only a few days ago. And I mentioned that it's almost finished. And she started crying. And she said, oh, she was the one who found the car for them. They needed a car in a hurry. They were living in North Wales. She'd spotted the Saab for sale in the mid-70s. And she went and bought it for them. And my gran hated it. She thought it looked awful. And my granddad absolutely loved it, and he kept it until his death, which was mid-90s. Then my uncle kept it, restored it slightly, and then passed it to me. So yeah, proper family heirloom. And we remember, myself, my brother and sister all remember being taken in this car and being utterly terrified at my grandfather's terrible driving.
I think that's what we call in the trade a keeper, isn't it?
It is. Can't really sell that one. Yeah.
There is a question that moves from the past to the future, and that's about how the future of electric cars, and particularly with Aston. I mean, it's kind of exciting and scary, and the government, I feel, make it harder and harder to own and cherish an older car unless it's actually 40 years or more. You don't get that kind of classic status. And then they're in London, you've got the ULEZ thing that restricts your driving. But how do you see the future of electric cars going? And are you excited about it?
I'm not completely against electric cars, and I think some of them will be really good. Some of them are really good. But I think all of us will probably agree, given that we're sat here talking about this, that there's nothing quite like a internal combustion engine. So yeah, I think we're going to miss that. I think the answer is, again, not an uncommon view that just saying it can only be electric out there is wrong and cuts off 100 years of technology. I'd like to think that actually we can carry on with the internal combustion engine with synthetic fuels, and hopefully keep things going on that side. But that will need the government to be, or governments around the world to be, a little bit more flexible. So yeah, it's a very difficult one. Again, I'd be fascinated to see a sort of thumbs up, thumbs down for electric.
Well, the question in the chat was, can you imagine electric future on Aston cars, which is a specific.
I can. I mean, certainly it's harder for Aston. If you look at Rolls-Royce or Bentley, I think it's almost a no-brainer that they've, for years, well, particularly Rolls-Royce, they've done everything they can to get rid of all noise, vibration, harshness, etc., to the point that you barely know the engine's there. It's just pulling you along at phenomenal rates. And electric is perfect for that. All that torque, smooth, easy to drive. That's perfect for a Rolls-Royce. And it's probably perfect for a little city car. Where we struggle, I think, is in the middle ground of Aston Martins and McLarens, where it is all about soundtrack and flicking through the gears, and just we are going to struggle. I don't think there's any way we can look at it. If you drive an electric car, you get that phenomenal acceleration, but you don't have the reference points of engine revving, gear changes, etc. And I think that's where we are going to miss out. As I say, I mean, look at Porsche. They are working really hard to develop synthetic fuels that might rescue the internal combustion.
Yeah, but they have also brought out that Taycan, which I believe is selling more than the 911 at the moment.
That's correct. Yeah, and people love it. That's not necessarily a sports car, is it? It's same. DBX, I can imagine, would work really well with an electric engine, but for certain owners.
Yeah,
there'll be a whole generation of youngsters growing up knowing no idea what a gear change is.
That is a danger as well. And I think that the biggest danger of all is probably public perception. You know, if you're sat in a DB6 in traffic at the moment, people are kind of giving you the thumbs up, or they're looking at it admiringly. What if people start looking at it and saying, oh, smelly old car sat there amongst all the EVs? And I don't think the government are deliberately trying to legislate classic cars out of existence, but they're not at the front of their mind. So they will bring legislation in that could exclude classic cars. And they won't do it deliberately. We've found this time and time again, working with the Federation of British Historic Vehicle Clubs, that actually, unless you tell the ministers that they've just proposed something that will really hit a massive industry, i.e. classic car industry and the collector car and performance car industry, they don't really understand what they've done. And that's where I think we've all got to really support organizations such as the Federation.
And just for anybody that's just watching this broadcast and doesn't realise that we the Aston Martin Owners Club are members of the FBHVC, and worldwide, of course, that they're affiliated to FIFA, which is, I can't remember what that stands for, but it's the same equivalent organisation around the world for looking after what we all love so much.
Yeah.
Even the modern cars we're driving are going to be classics, perhaps sooner than would otherwise be the case if the EV revolution takes hold as quickly as it seems to be doing.
It's very true. And that, you know, there is a huge power, at least. There are some, you know, I think the top end with the Aston Martins and other marques like that, we're kind of say we're a bit safer. But if you say the more practical classics end of the market is possibly where the struggle will be.
Thank you, Wolfgang Hensler, for raising these questions, because you just added a comment. Absolute agree to this problem.
Can I ask, I think it's in your latest issue, or maybe it's only online, but you've recently covered this story about the missing James Bond DB5. And I know there's a bit of a story to that, and you found out a bit more information recently. Could you share that with us a bit?
Yeah, we've been following this for a while. And then the news was allowed to be released in August last year. And we've just updated it online in the last few days, and there will be a bigger piece in the next issue, which comes out early Feb. This guy called Christopher, again off the top of my head, Marinello or something, or Marinella, something like that. he runs a company called Art Recovery, and he's been responsible for some amazing finds in the art world. He tracks things down, especially Nazi looted art. He's very, very good at that and returning them to original owners, obviously for commission. For the DB5, the gold is one of the proper film cars, and probably a lot of you are aware that this particular car is owned by several people, including, I think, Anthony Bamford of JCB. I might be wrong on that. He certainly owned one of them. But this particular car is verified Goldfinger car. It had all the gadgets on it. It then went to Aston Works at Newport Pagnell immediately after filming. Well, the Aston factory at Newport Pagnell, as it was at the time. And they took all the gadgets off, sold the car. The new owner then had the gadgets reinstated. And then it went through a number of owners and ended up with a guy in Florida, big property developer. And he had it put away in a lockup, sorry, not a lockup, a big warehouse. And it was sat there, and one night in, I think it was June 1997, the locks to the doors were cut and the car was dragged out. And you can actually see where the tires are dragged along, which everything seems a little odd about it. It looks like a chain was put on it and it was just dragged out. And you think, well, why wasn't it unlocked? Because we all know that era of any classic car isn't that difficult to unlock. Why didn't they just get into it quickly, let the handbrake off? Who knows? But apparently it was dragged out and it disappeared, and it's never been seen since. So Christopher from Art Recovery has been working with the insurers who paid out back in the late 90s. I'm trying to think what they paid out, and I think it was 4.2 million. The car is now valued over 20 million. And they're offering a $100,000 reward for the car's recovery. And Christopher has been working on it for the last 15 years, since 2007. And he's tracked it down, and he tracked it down to a number of collectors, or narrowed it down to a number of collectors in the Middle East. And he didn't know exactly where it was. He didn't have proof it was there, but that was anecdotal evidence that it had been seen out in Dubai in particular. And then a source of his claimed he'd seen the car, and he managed to describe 3 serial numbers, all of which were correct. And I think, again, off the top of my head, it's something like DP/216/2, I think. He described the 2 obvious places that the serial number is, but he also described a 3rd place, which was unique to that car, and some other unique features. And I don't know what they are. They're not being released, but certainly those people who know say that these features are, or rather this description of the features does verify that this guy has seen the car at some point. And it narrows it down to about 3 or 4 collectors. It seems to be in a big underground collection, but they're very low profile collectors, but they have a lot of money. The theory is that possibly a kind theory, is that they didn't know that the car was stolen when they got it. Who knows? But what Christopher's doing now, he's made a few more leaps, and he's gradually narrowed it down to a much closer area. And he has put out the message to these collectors that he knows it's around. If they come to him, things can be done quietly. If they don't, then he claims he's going to go and kind of knock on the door, or their very big gates, and send the police in, and they'll be exposed. The big thing for him is getting the car back. So again, that was a little long-winded of me, apologies, but that's where we are with this car at the moment. So I'm in constant contact with Christopher, and as soon as he finds something else out, he tells us.
It's a bit of a kind of spy story in itself, isn't it?
It's very odd. And when you look at the history of the owner, that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult, because he was imprisoned for fraud on property development in the 2000s. And I don't mean that to say, I'm not implying a thing with that, but it certainly muddied the waters. So yeah, very, very difficult story. But the fact that this such a high profile car disappeared overnight is always struck everybody as extremely odd.
Well, I hope if option 2 is the option they end up going for and knocking on the door with the police, that someone takes a video camera and we can all get to watch it.
Be interested, wouldn't it? I imagine they will.
It might be a YouTube hit. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it will.
Someone said, wow, what a great story. Thank you. Oh, thank you again, Wolfgang. Alex Watt has asked, what are your feelings on pre-war cars?
The simple answer is I love them. I guess often people ask me that because they fear that the pre-war market is dying, and as we all get older, then there's, or rather as younger collectors come in, they're going to be less interested in pre-war. Certainly my feeling is that you probably start at the cars that you wanted in your youth, and the more you get into cars, the more you think, oh, I wonder what that's like, I wonder what that's like. And you get to experience older cars. I was talking to somebody for a podcast a few weeks ago, and he said he loves pre-war cars, but he can't stand anything before 1910. And then I said, well, London to Brighton is the most phenomenal experience, and they're early 1900s. And those cars, you feel everything that's going on. You understand everything that's going on. You can feel, when you get it right, you can feel the cogs meshing as you change gear. And I think, you know, people who play golf will say when they get that perfect swing and the ball just clicks and off it goes, feels like that when you're balancing that double declutching and just getting the throttle right and slotting it into gear. But I think there is a danger that people won't understand them as we get younger collectors in. But you've got yourselves and the BSCC and clubs like that doing a pretty good job of promoting these cars. So it does feel like that as long as we can keep them in the public eye and keep explaining and showing people just how interesting they are, I think they've got a good chance of surviving. Excuse me, sorry.
I think they, in fact, along with right up to modern petrol cars, well, perhaps not in immediate modern cars, but all recent cars are all obsolescent. But they'll probably never be obsolete for the point you made earlier, which is as long as we can get synthetic fuels from somewhere, they'll never be obsolete. Although with our latest EV cars, we don't know whether we're driving the Betamax version or the VHS version at the moment, do we?
It's very true. Yeah. There's another one. Low annual mileage is driven in cars that were built to be driven, e.g. 100 miles in an MP Vanquish. I think it's a real problem, particularly in the States, that collectors are buying these, or maybe speculators are buying these cars, and they're then coming up for auction when they're 2-3 years old, and a big thing is made of the fact that they've got 100 miles on the clock, they've got 70 miles on the clock. It's really dangerous. We all know that doesn't do a car any good whatsoever, but it is a phenomena that's been promoted by these very high prices that are going through auction houses. And a big thing is made of these cars that have hardly got any miles on. Well, it's just unhealthy all round. It's not going to be doing dealers any good because they're not going to be seeing the car. It's certainly not doing the cars any good. And all right, it's very nice to possess a car and look at it, but it's a damn sight nicer to be taking it out and sharing it with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. You said earlier that you had a car which you sold because it was just in too good a condition, and you felt bad driving it. I think there are a lot of members that maybe feel the same way. But yeah, it's a shame to have a beautiful car and actually not put it to the use that it was intended.
It is, yeah. That's a terrible thing, really, with that 996 I had, that it was immaculate, and I was just thinking, oh, if I get a stone chip, I'm going to devalue it. And I I should be the last person thinking like that, but it was in my head, and I was jumping in my old Subaru instead. It's ridiculous. And I, that's very wrong of me. But I think we all do it to a point. We have a car restored. We find it's so good that suddenly, oh, maybe we don't take it out in the rain, which kind of narrows things down a little bit for the UK. And yeah, it's a danger. And I think we've got to be brave and take these things out, because it does them a lot more good being taken out and driven.
Yeah.
That's a good question about, I don't know how far this is going to take you back, but it can be cars, bikes, watches, anything. But is there anything that from your career you'd never do again?
Launch a magazine. Law people stupid on a forum. Do you know what? There's probably not, because we talked about this earlier, and I've had some strange experiences. I did a year of Caterham racing, which is basically lots of very over-enthusiastic guys smashing into each other in the first few races, and there were times when I wondered whether I should be doing that. I did Austin A35 racing, where it was a bunch of over-enthusiastic guys rolling A35s. But it was all great. Probably my most difficult experience career-wise, I did a year launching an online platform called Auto Classics, which then turned into a funny thing called Motorious. But Auto Classics, it was quite successful initially. And I really enjoyed being on top of the news side of things all the time and knowing exactly what was going on. But my God, it's so hard to keep up with the website, and it's just such a hungry beast.
Yeah.
And if something comes up at 10 at night, you've just got to put it online. You can't not.
Yeah.
I think that almost broke me for a year. So if there's anything, it's certainly not to do with cars as such. It's don't get involved with bloody websites.
Yeah. I'm just noticed we're slightly less than 15 minutes before we said we'd finish. If anybody's got a question they want to ask in person, please go to the bottom of your screen, click the hand button, little wave, and we'll cue you in. It'd be lovely to hear somebody else rather than just me and Steve, I'm sure.
There is a question on the chat at the moment as well about what are my thoughts on self-driving cars? And probably my thoughts are, well, maybe it's not a bad thing when I need to get to my dad's house I live in Peterborough, my dad is in Lymington in the New Forest. Maybe there are certain times when it could just take me down the A1, round the M25, down the M3, and thank you very much. And I could just do some work or read a book.
You feed the website.
Yeah, I think, yeah, exactly. I still can't quite see how they work without everything being self-driving. I think it's this crossover point. And I can understand the thought maybe that every car on a motorway sits self-driven, autonomous, and then you get onto B roads and you're back controlling it. That kind of makes sense. But it feels like a very difficult thing to achieve. And also the whole morality of programming these cars. They come up to it's been said a lot before, but come up to a pedestrian crossing, there's a little girl crossing it, you could swerve, miss the little girl, but hit an old lady. How is that programmed into autonomy? It's there's a hell of a lot to think about. And at the moment, insurance companies are really struggling with that side of things, which is delaying it just as much as the technology is delaying it.
And the impression is that some of this technology has been designed by sort of 13-year-olds in Silicon Valley who've never seen a British B road.
I think there is a bit of that as well, yeah. Yes.
Now, if I was sitting watching this broadcast, I'd be like we all do when we're watching Zooms, looking at the background, your lovely pictures and your guitar and your stack of books, and I'd be wondering what that plaque's for with number 77 on top of the bookcase.
That was Tor Auto. So I've done two things with a friend of mine, Guy Harmon. We did Mille Miglia, and you will see that journalists often do end up doing Mille Miglia with manufacturers. And they're very pampered, and you get handed everything, and they go in that direction, and you go fast down an Italian road, and that's it. But I was lucky enough for my friend Guy to want to do it as a privateer, and we did it, and we worked through all the paperwork ourselves and kind of got the proper flavour of it. And we didn't have any support other than a friend who was following us every now and again in a Punto with some tools in the back. And really, we didn't need that. And we had a phenomenal time with, I don't know if anyone here has done Mille Miglia. I know it's an incredibly, there we go, incredibly lucky, I feel, to have done it. But I did get to the end of it and think, I'm very glad I've done that. I'm very glad I'm still alive. I'd like to do it again, but some of the driving standards are slightly horrific. But you do get these incredible moments where the police you'll have an outrider alongside you, and they'll be on this police bike, and they'll just be sort of going faster. And you think, I actually don't want to go any faster, thank you. There we go. Yeah, it looks like Wolfgang's had the same experience, and it is slightly bonkers. The plaque is actually for Tour Auto. Mille Miglia I did in an XK120 with little fly screens and the side exhaust, and gave myself horrific tinnitus because we lost our earplugs. We did Tour Auto a year later, and that starts in Paris and goes down to the south of France. We did that in a 911, which the organisers of Tour Auto basically, well, they said to our faces, it's cheating doing it in a 911, it's too easy. But it was, again, another fantastic experience, more officious, not as, certainly don't get the police encouraging you to go fast. There were a lot of speed traps on that one, but an amazing experience.
Oh, brilliant, thank you for that. I just think we need to should we bring it back to Magneto as we draw to a close? I'm thinking specifically about the magazine and its availability to our members, some of whom may already be subscribers and some who may not. And well, I can certainly recommend it. What's your view? What we're offering now?
So we've, yeah, at the moment we're about to, I'm just reading the questions as well. So Wolfgang said he did the Mille Miglia in a Zagato, DB7 Zagato.
I think he may have been on the same trip as one that we reported in AM Quarterly in a Vanquish Zagato shooting break. So he
wow, yes, oh, amazing. And Alex says, closest I've come to it is the Montana 500 open road race for stock Model Ts, which must have been phenomenal. Yeah, I like the sound of that. So, sorry, Magneto, we put out an offer a few weeks back saying we'll send copies out and then you can subscribe for 20% off. We'll do that again. So you'll all receive, I think, an email. Is that correct, Christine? With a link through where you can subscribe for 20% off. We have got more Aston Martin content coming up. But yeah, obviously I will say, you know, keep me in breakfasts and new posters for the wall, and subscribe. But I would.
And by the same token, we'd be great to see you at one of our events, or the concourse, or anything that we're running. Come along and come and say hello. It'd be nice to say hello in person. You're probably on this call now.
I have promised to do so. So yeah, I must do that.
I've got a quick question for you. The magazine, as well as covering cars, you have a section towards the back called Acquire, I think, which tends to be editorial on things kind of car related, or that car enthusiasts tend to also like watches. Interesting enough, you are a keen watch enthusiast. Can you tell us a bit about the kind of stuff that you cover there? I mean, you don't give it a lot of coverage. I think literally it's a few pages, but what seems to be the most popular kinds of links that you have?
Well, I'll rewind slightly in that this kind of started actually with Octane. When we launched Octane, we'd all of us had been on Classic Cars magazine. I'd been on Practical Classics, I'd been on a few others. And we realized that magazines had got very stuck in their ways. And that was the prompt for Octane, which launched April 2003. And in that, thanks to really the two of us were editing it, myself and Robert Kuchar. And Robert was the one who really pushed for a few non-car things, such as watches. And we had a page in there called, which is still in, although I had nothing to do with it, called Icon. And that could be anything from, there was golly, there was one on the bikini. There have been Leica cameras. So all these iconic items, and one guy, right, has written every single one, and they're over 200 issues now for Octane, and they're just really fascinating.
Yeah.
So when we launched Magneto, I didn't want to copy that. Obviously, I didn't want it to look like a quarterly version of Octane, but certainly we looked at the various things that car people tend to be into. And to finally get to your question, the thing that does tend to bond people is certainly motoring art, and it doesn't have to be anything high end. It can just be, you know, interesting posters, things like that. And watches, mechanical watches. And again, they don't have to be expensive. You can buy some of these sort of old Swiss watches for 100 quid. I've just bought an old Seiko, actually, obviously not Swiss, for £30, and I absolutely love it. And I was lucky enough to buy a Hoya for my 40th birthday, which was 13 years ago. So I treated myself, and again, that was about £500. And that seems to have gone up in value, which is nice, but it gets to the point where you think, do I really want to be wearing that on my wrist all the time? So I think you have to buy the things that you really enjoy. But watches is the one thing that seems to unite us all.
A good metaphor for cars as well. You know,
Totally,
we
yeah.
buy things, we enjoy them, and then when they go to become too valuable, does that stop us enjoying them? And hopefully that's not the case.
Yeah, but you know, we've seen that with early DBs, I guess, haven't we?
Yeah.
I know people who've sold the family DB because they're not sure what to do with it anymore because of the value, and yeah, it gets difficult.
Steve, any more from you?
No, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover.
Well, I think we're look at that, 4 minutes to go. Anything more from you, David?
I would really no, I know we asked a while back, or we talked just before we opened this up about the future of print, and I'm quite passionate about that, and I covered it a bit when we started, but I do think that if people support top-end print and enjoy top-end print, I'm not saying go and buy Magneto regardless of whether or not you like it. I hope you like it, but I think there is a really strong future for really good print magazines, and you've seen quite a few very interesting magazines coming out in quarterly form now and in monthly form, and I think it is really important that they continue and that we don't allow everything to slip online, because I think there's a collectability about magazines that I love. What you can't see is I've got 2 shelves just to my right that are absolutely rammed with magazines, and then another cupboard that's just stacked full of the damn things. And all right, that's a disadvantage, but it's also a great advantage that you can just sit back and flick through them. And I think there's something really special about magazines and books. And so I've got my favorite books back there, and then again, more bookshelves in the other room.
I think a lot of us would agree with that. And to my right, I've got a full set of Vantages. And the last question we're going to take is the one that says, I'm curious about the demise of Vantages. Magazine, that is.
Yeah. Yes. that was really sad.
Yeah.
We launched that when I was still at Octane. And we'd sold Octane to Dennis Publishing, but stuck with it. So we launched by ourselves, by remortgaging and things, which is a stupid idea, really. But we sold to Dennis Publishing. They were very, very keen for a long while on Octane and Evo, that was a stablemate, and sort of expanding that. So we did Vantage and we did Enzo. And just in the last 2 or 3 years, certainly after I'd gone, and I felt this coming, that they started to get much more almost obsessive about digital and selling platforms and new car platforms. And they certainly lost interest in the more niche magazines that were actually bringing them a decent profit and had a very loyal readership, which of course the online hasn't. And gradually they ran Vantage down. Really, I mean, it's heartbreaking to see them. Peter Tomlin and Dickie Meaden, who ran Vantage right from the start, they're absolutely heartbroken about it. And they do want to, they're still trying to sort of revive and find another way of reviving something like Vantage, because it really feels like there's a place for it. But sadly, the publishing company didn't feel it was worthwhile, and they won't sell the name or the assets. So it's stuck there at the moment, which is, it's a sad thing to end on, but I think there's light at the end of that tunnel. And it's not because it wasn't commercially successful, it was because publishing company wasn't really into it anymore.
Well, thank you for that. And I think we'll dwell on the light at the end of the tunnel, like you say, rather than the negative. You clearly are an advocate and a very welcome one for print media and good quality print media. So thank you again for joining us. We're going to close it up there. Thank you again also to Christine for pulling the levers and pressing the buttons in the background, and to Steve for helping me host this session. And finally, of course, to everybody who took the trouble to dial in and watch this. Well, it'll be on the club's YouTube channel fairly soon. And thank you. Cheerio, everybody.